My name is Colin Ashford. I am 32 years old, and for most of my life, my family assumed I would always be the one who quietly backed down when things became complicated. The quiet one, the agreeable one, the one who never made a scene. Like an empty fool, yes. And maybe, at one time, that was true. But when my grandparents, Walter and Rose Ashford, passed away and left their entire estate to me, the house, the savings, and the shares valued just under $900,000, something inside me changed. I began paying attention. I started listening more carefully. And most importantly, I began planning, because I knew exactly what kind of people I was related to. My younger brother, Grant Ashford, is 3 years younger than I am. He is flashy, loud, and charismatic, the kind of person who can lie directly to your face and still somehow convince you to loan him $5,000 for what he calls a guaranteed investment. Over the years, he has gotten away with more than anyone should. Credit cards in our mother's name, a borrowed car that mysteriously vanished, and every single time, our mother, Evelyn Ashford, bailed him out. She always excused it by saying he was just figuring things out. But me? I was always expected to be the responsible one, the backup plan, the safety net. And I was finished playing that role. When Grandpa Walter passed away 2 years ago, a year after Grandma Rose, he left the entire estate solely to me. I wasn't surprised. I had been their caretaker when no one else even bothered to call, much less visit. I drove them to their appointments, handled their groceries, and managed the endless stream of paperwork that came with aging. Grant? He showed up on Christmas morning, snapped a few photos for Instagram, and then disappeared until the next holiday. When the will was read and my name was the only one written in it, I saw the look my mother gave me, that tight-lipped, disappointed twist of her face, as though I had stolen something that was rightfully hers to control. That was the moment I realized the storm was coming. The house was the crown jewel of the inheritance. A breathtaking old Victorian, built with deep red bricks, tall windows, and ivy crawling up the sides like something out of a storybook. It was a historic property passed down through 3 generations, and my grandparents had maintained it in near-perfect condition. The neighborhood had exploded in value over the past decade. All around, the houses had been gutted and flipped into modern shells, but my grandparents never sold. And now it was mine. I did not move into the house right away. Instead, I kept my apartment across town and quietly worked on getting everything in order. I had the property appraised, consulted with an estate attorney, and set up a trust. Not just for the house, for everything. I told no one. Not Grant, not Evelyn, not a single person in the family. I secured the original deed in a safe location and transferred the entire estate title, assets, savings into an irrevocable trust with myself as trustee. I even moved the utilities under a business entity tied to the trust. It cost extra fees, but I did not care. I knew my family too well. I knew they would try something. For a while, everything was quiet. Too quiet. Grant texted me a couple of times asking if he could use the pool. The house doesn't even have one. Evelyn dropped hints about how unfair it was to leave everything to only one person. She even remarked, "Well, your brother was always Grandpa Walter's favorite, you know," as if that meant anything. I just nodded and changed the subject. I didn't argue. I didn't correct them. I let them think I was naive, that I hadn't taken precautions. But the tension really ignited last month. Grant started posting vague messages on social media. Big things coming, next chapter loading, all that nonsense. Then one Saturday, I was at the house trimming the hedges when I saw Evelyn's car pulling into the driveway. Grant jumped out first, grinning behind his sunglasses as though he had just arrived for a photo shoot. Evelyn followed, carrying a clipboard and smiling like she was about to cut the ribbon on a brand new development. "Hey, man," Grant said, clapping me on the shoulder. "We've got some news." I just raised an eyebrow. "We?" Evelyn stepped forward. "We spoke to a lawyer. It turns out the house should have gone to both of you. Your grandfather made a mistake by not updating the will after your grandmother passed. But don't worry, we handled it. I stared at her. Handled what, exactly? Grant pulled a folded sheet of paper from his back pocket and waved it in the air. We had the house title transferred into my name. It's already done. You'll need to be out by Friday. But no hard feelings, right? Well, give you time to grab your things. For a moment, I said nothing. I looked at both of them, studying their smug expressions, their audacity. My heart wasn't racing. I wasn't panicking. In fact, I nearly laughed, because they truly believed I was that careless. Instead, I smiled small, polite, the kind of smile that makes people uneasy. You really think I'd let that happen? I asked. Grant chuckled, like I had just told a joke. It's already happening, dude. You've been living in fantasy land for way too long. Evelyn softened her tone, as though that would help. We're not trying to be cruel, Colin. It's just practical. Grant can manage the property, maybe even flip it. You already have your own place. This way, everyone wins. I didn't argue. I just nodded slowly and said, got it. 2 days later, they returned, this time with a moving truck and a pair of hired movers. I had been expecting it. They pulled into the driveway as if they already owned the place, laughing and shouting at each other. Grant sat in the passenger seat sipping his coffee, while Evelyn directed the movers toward the front door like she was running the whole operation. But then they saw the porch. I was standing there with my arms crossed, and beside me was a tall man in a navy suit. He carried a thick folder under one arm and wore a badge clipped to his belt. The folder bore the name of the trust, Ravenwood Estate Trust, a name my family had never heard before. The badge was real. The man was real. And he was from the County Office of Property Records. His name was Harold Pennington. They froze in their tracks. Grant stepped out first, looking confused. What's going on? He asked. I didn't answer. Instead, Mr. Pennington cleared his throat with the calm authority of someone who had done this too many times to be rattled by theatrics. He glanced down at the document in his hand before speaking in a firm but measured tone. Are you Grant Ashford? He asked. Grant frowned. Yeah. Who's asking? Mr. Pennington stepped forward slightly. I'm with the County Office of Property Records. I'm here on behalf of the legal trustee of the Ravenwood Estate, this property. He gestured toward the house. I have documentation showing the deed has been held in a trust since April of last year under the management of Colin Ashford. Any claims regarding ownership made since that date, including a fraudulent title transfer, are not only invalid, but criminally prosecutable. Grant's face went pale. Fraudulent? He muttered, glancing at Evelyn. What's he talking about? Evelyn stepped forward, lips pressed tight. There must be some mistake. We had a lawyer check the old deed. It was still in Walter's name. We assumed. You assumed wrong, I said, breaking my silence for the first time. I never left the property in my direct name. It's owned by a trust. That's why you couldn't find anything in the public logs. You went to some shady title mill and tried to fake a transfer with outdated documents. Mr. Pennington nodded. A fraud report has already been filed on the attempted transfer. Normally, we'd send a warning first, but considering you showed up with movers, attempted to evict the legal trustee, and tried to seize the property, you're moving straight to enforcement. Enforcement? Grant echoed, his voice cracking. I turned toward him, my voice steady. It means if you set foot on this property again without my permission, you're trespassing. And if you try to tamper with the trust or any of its assets, you're looking at multiple charges. For a long, heavy moment, no one said a word. The movers stood awkwardly between the truck and the porch, clearly realizing they had walked into a minefield. One of them coughed and began backing slowly toward the van. Finally, Grant snapped. You're seriously doing this to family? My voice was calm. Too calm. Family? You showed up here with forged documents and a moving crew. You tried to steal my home, the one thing Grandpa Walter and Grandma Rose wanted me to have. Don't talk to me about family. Evelyn's jaw tightened. They were confused, Colin. They didn't understand. No, I cut her off sharply. You didn't understand. You thought I was still the pushover I was at 20. The kid you could guilt into babysitting Grant's drama or lending money because you needed it just this once. But I'm not that kid anymore. I learned. I listened. And I prepared. Mr. Pennington flipped through his folder. Also, just so we're clear, the local precinct has been alerted. If either of you attempt to return with property claims, we'll have a civil and criminal case file ready to go. Grant's eyes burned, but he didn't speak. Instead, he turned to the movers and snapped, "We're leaving." He didn't look at me again. Evelyn lingered for a moment, her mouth opening as though she wanted to make one last plea, but nothing came out. She followed Grant back to the truck. They drove off, and I stood there on the porch, watching the taillights fade. The quiet that followed was heavier than before, the kind of silence that settles after a confrontation that has been building for years. Mr. Pennington handed me a copy of the filed report and said, "Call if they come back." I thanked him, and after he left, I just stood there for a long while, on the same porch where I used to sit with Grandpa Walter, listening to him talk about people. Not just what they said, but their patterns, their habits. He used to tell me, "Don't judge people by what they say in a moment. Judge them by what they do when they think you're not watching." He was right. I had watched, and this time, I had acted. But that was not the end. Because 3 days later, I received a letter formal, typed, and signed this time from another lawyer hired by Evelyn. In it, she claimed emotional distress and argued that, as a direct descendant, she had a moral and familial right to a portion of the estate. She demanded compensation for the mental anguish of being excluded. Attached was a list of what she called reasonable reparations: $150,000 in cash, joint ownership of the family home, and a monthly allowance until further notice. At first, I stared at the letter in disbelief. Then my hands began to shake, not with fear, but with fury. Because she was not finished. And now, neither was I. I must have read that letter 6 times in silence before setting it down on my desk. The first few times, I tried to convince myself she did not mean it the way it sounded. But by the 6th reading, there was no more room for denial. My own mother, Evelyn Ashford, had put her name on legal stationery and essentially tried to invoice me for not letting her and Grant steal what Walter and Rose had entrusted to me. It wasn't even about the money. What infuriated me most was the entitlement, the audacity to call the entire situation a misunderstanding one day and then send me a legal demand for $150,000 the next, as if this were nothing more than a business dispute between strangers. And the phrase that kept echoing in my mind, louder than anything else, was familial obligation. As if loyalty was supposed to flow only one way upward toward them. As if I had been born to give, and they had been born to take. I didn't respond immediately. I knew better than to let anger write my reply. Instead, I called Harold Pennington, who referred me to a sharp estate attorney named Miranda Faulkner. She was in her early 40s, soft-spoken but razor-focused, the kind of professional who never bluffed because she never needed to. I gave her everything: the trust documents, the letter from Evelyn's lawyer, even screenshots of texts and social media posts from Grant's ridiculous Next Chapter campaign. Within a day, Miranda had filed a formal cease and desist order against both of them. The message was crystal clear: the trust was airtight, legally shielded, and they had no standing whatsoever. But Miranda didn't stop there. She dug deeper. She discovered that Grant had forged multiple signatures in his attempt to push through the bogus title transfer. He had even used a fake notary stamp and filed the documents through a shady online registry in another state, hoping it wouldn't be caught in our county records. Miranda contacted a fraud investigator with the county district attorney's office. It turned out they were already investigating that registry for similar scams. Without even realizing it, Grant had just handed them the perfect case to build on. I still hadn't told my family that I knew any of this. I figured if they wanted to keep pushing, I would let them keep digging their own hole. And dig they did. A few days after Miranda began her work, another letter arrived. This one was a formal demand from a different lawyer, the one Evelyn had hired. It claimed emotional distress and argued that, as a direct descendant, she had a moral and familial right to part of the estate. Attached was a list of reasonable reparations, $150,000 in cash, joint ownership of the family home, and a monthly allowance until further notice. The tone was clinical, the entitlement grotesque. I read it and reread it until my hands shook. At first I told myself there must be some mistake, that maybe she didn't realize how it sounded. By the fourth reading, denial was impossible. My mother had put her name on legal stationery and attempted to bill me for protecting what Walter and Rose had entrusted to me. It was not the money itself that stung so much as the sense of entitlement, the idea that loyalty was owed upward, that I existed to give while they existed to take. I paused, then called Miranda. She was calm and pragmatic. "This is performative," she said. "It's intimidation dressed as litigation. Well, file a response and assemble the paper trail. Don't engage emotionally, let us manage the legal side." I followed her advice. Then something unexpected. Sophie Winslow, my cousin whom I hadn't spoken to in years, sent me a private message saying, "Your mom's been calling people. You should know." We met for coffee the next morning. Sophie was sharp and direct. She showed me screenshots, voicemail transcripts, forwarded texts, and a family group chat where Evelyn had been seeding a story. According to my mother, I had manipulated Walter in his final years, convinced him to change the will while he was declining mentally. She implied I had taken advantage of him emotionally and legally. It was a smear campaign, and it was moving fast. My stomach turned. If my mother was willing to lie to the extended family, to poison their view of me, to pressure me into surrendering what was lawfully mine, then this was no longer just about a house. This was about control. I decided not to react out of anger. Instead, I compiled evidence. Miranda helped me prepare a formal declaration, a clean, documented statement of facts, the trust documents, the notary and title records, the forged transfer attempt, the cease and desist, screenshots of my mother's calls and texts, and the lawyer's demand for $150,000. Then I did something that made me nervous. I sent a concise, factual message to 27 relatives who had been contacted by my mother. The message read, in essence, "Before you draw conclusions, here are the documents. Decide with facts, not gossip. I will not be discussing this further." The response was immediate. Within hours, several relatives replied, some apologetic, some horrified by what they saw, a few defensive. My Aunt Robin, who had always sided with Grant, called me in tears saying she had believed what she'd been told until she saw the documents. That small human shift was a relief, but not everyone changed their mind. A handful of family members doubled down, accusing me of fabricating evidence. I accepted that I wouldn't win them all. The goal was to prevent the lie from metastasizing unchecked. Next, Miranda and I discussed other leverage points. If Grant had forged documents and attempted a fraudulent transfer, there were consequences beyond family shame. He worked at a boutique real estate firm, a place that bragged about transparency and ethics. I prepared an anonymous tip to their internal ethics line. I packaged a professional PDF with exhibits, the attempted transfer, the fake notary stamp, the social posts, and the pattern of behavior. I did not want to ruin anyone's life gratuitously, but I also wanted to ensure that where fraud and professional misconduct intersected, the employers who trusted him knew the truth. It took 2 days. The firm removed Grant from their website and launched an internal review. Word from a compliance contact I trusted confirmed they'd found irregularities in client files. Within a week, his name had been suspended and reported to the state licensing board. He called me repeatedly, 11 missed calls in 1 day. I didn't answer. The public drama was minimal, there were no tabloid headlines. But the consequences were real. His professional credentials were at risk, and his reputation was damaged. 2 days after that, the county clerk's office issued notice. A warrant was being prepared related to the forged transfer. The shady online registry Grant had used was already under investigation, and his application had given prosecutors the smoking gun they needed. He was charged with attempted property fraud and submitting falsified records to a government agency. I read the notice and felt a complicated relief. This was necessary, not cruel. He had chosen his actions. As for Evelyn, once the evidence circulated among the extended family and the legal filings were visible, she fell silent. No calls, no demands, no more veiled threats. A few weeks later I received a letter from her lawyer, a carefully worded note stating she was withdrawing all pending claims and requesting no further contact. I didn't celebrate. I felt freed. That night I walked through Ravenwood Estate alone, barefoot on the old hardwood floors. The house smelled faintly of cedar and old paper. I stood in the room where Grandpa Walter used to sit, the same spot where He'd told me to watch people's actions more than their words, and I whispered, I kept it safe. For the first time in my life, I felt something I had never let myself fully feel, not victory, exactly, but peace. I had protected what they entrusted me, and in doing so I stopped being the quiet one. It has been 8 months since that night. In that time, everything has shifted, not because I forced it, but because I finally stopped playing by their script. Grant lost his job. His real estate license was suspended pending investigation. He'll likely avoid prison, but fines, probation, and a permanent mark on his record will follow him. Every time he tries to rebuild, that shadow will remain. Evelyn withdrew all her claims and vanished into silence. No phone calls, no apologies, no explanations. Just absence. And maybe that is better. Some relatives reached out. Clara Winslow wrote long messages, apologizing for believing lies too easily. Aunt Robin still calls sometimes, always with a softer voice. A few others stayed distant, convinced I had somehow manipulated everything. That doesn't matter to me anymore. For once, I am not living for their approval. And me? I kept the house. I kept the legacy. More importantly, I kept my dignity. Walter and Rose Ashford gave me something that was never about money, it was about trust. And I honored it. One evening, walking barefoot across the creaking hardwood floors of Ravenwood Estate, I realized something. For years I had been cast as the quiet one, the agreeable one, the one who bent so others wouldn't break. But not anymore. This time, I didn't just hold the line. I rewrote it. That's my story. For years, I was the quiet one until I finally realized silence only served the people who wanted to take from me. I chose to act, to protect what was mine, and to rewrite the role I'd been forced into. But now I want to ask you something. If you were in my shoes, standing on that porch, facing your own family trying to strip away everything you built, what would you have done? Would you confront them? Stay silent? Or walk away?